blanket. If y'all see anybody trying to get in, please bring it to my attention. All right, when we left off, I believe that we were talking about the Hebrews. Is that correct? And Hebrew number 1 is Abraham or Ibrahim. Where are we here? Come on now. There we go. Abraham or Ibrahim, whatever. And God told Abraham that you and your wife are going to have a son, and he will be the father of a new nation. And that's all good and well, but Abraham and his wife Sarah were rather old, which makes having children a bit of a challenge. And so Abraham had a child with a servant by the name of Hagar. Yahweh comes back to Abraham, says, no, that's not what I told you to do. I said you and your wife will have a son. And so Abraham and his wife Sarah had son number 2, who is Isaac. And Isaac is the proper son, so to speak. And Ishmael and Hagar were sent away because they are not appropriate. Now, again, there is a different version of this that we will get to later in the semester. Nevertheless, Abraham and his people lived in the mountains in between the Jordan River Valley and the sea. There are other people living here. There are the Philistines. There are the Canaanites. There are others as well. And these are not particularly well-off people. Living in the mountains means you can't really farm. You can't really fish. These are herdsmen. You know, they raise goats and sheep and things like that. It's a very hard life. And they aren't particularly liked by everybody else. You know, they're those weird people up in the mountains that nobody thinks too well of. Well, Isaac will end up having a son, and that son is named Jacob. Yes?
I have an emergency. Oh.
Okay. Yeah. You got to leave your phone. Isaac is going to have a son named Jacob. And the descendants of Jacob are going to found 12 tribes. Now, they're not all Jacob's children. Some are, grandchildren, whatever. But the descendants of Jacob found 12 separate Hebrew tribes. They're all Hebrews, but they are different tribes. That's the easiest way to look at it. And they are doing their thing in the mountains. At some point, now, again, we've talked about how the primary sources on this basically don't exist, and so nobody can really know for sure. This is really more tradition than anything else, and so there have been attempts to try to figure out what the time frame here would have been. But we will say around 1200 BC, during the height of the New Kingdom, there was a terrible drought. Mother Nature does not always send the rain. Mother Nature does not always make the crops grow or whatever. We know that. And so everybody in this region is suffering tremendously, and the poorest among them are going to suffer the most, and of course that's the Hebrews. But there is a place where there's plenty of food. There is a place where there's plenty of prosperity, where everybody's fat and happy and there's stability and order, and that place is, of course, Egypt. Right? This is the zenith of the Old Kingdom. Egypt is doing fine. And so the Hebrews went to Egypt. They fled and became environmental refugees. There's nothing to eat here. There's nothing to do here. We're starving and dying. And so we're going to go where the food is. We're going to go where the prosperity is. Now, whether or not this event actually happened doesn't really matter, because we know that this is human nature. This is what people do. Anytime there is a prosperous, stable, successful society, people from the not-so-prosperous places want to go there, right? It sucks where I live. I'm going to go where the money is. And that's very much present today, isn't it? The United States is a nation where people from all over the underdeveloped world want to come here because they can get a better life here. And we're really the first nation to embrace that idea. You know, generally speaking, when we're doing great, those different people, we don't want them here. You know, they're poor and they're different and they're weird and we don't want them here. The United States is the first nation founded on the principle of, come on in, you know, you will contribute to our society. And every time we have had large migrations, generally from places that aren't so well off, in the long run, we end up benefiting tremendously from it. You know, 100 or so years ago, people from Italy and people from Poland and people from Ireland came here, very poor, very downtrodden, and their descendants have made tremendous contributions. If you go out to California, you know, Chinese peasants by the boatload came over here in the 19th century, and their descendants have contributed greatly. And so societies have to really think, do we want to keep ourselves open to the outside world, or do we want to look inward and block the outside world off? You know, there's decisions that have to be made in societies. And statistically speaking, when you open the world to the world and you embrace the world and you understand everything that comes with it, your society actually ends up better off. Yeah.
I was just going to ask that, which one does better?
Well, again, it's kind of, again, I don't want to just get in, it's in psychology class, but there are kind of two ways of looking at the outside world, right? You know, there's the let's build a wall and keep all those weirdos out, or there's let's open up and let them in, right? And over and over again, we have seen that nations that say, come on in and we're going to interact with everybody, in the big picture end up better off. But of course, what's the price that you're going to pay by doing that? When you open yourself up like that, there's also a price to be paid. What are the prices that we pay? Well, those people are coming in and taking our stuff, right? You know, I'm doing good and now, you know, we have to support them, right? There's also the idea that they're going to change who we are. Right? You know, we all look the same and we all act the same and we have the same culture and we have the same religion and we have the same this and the same that and we're homogenous. And these different outside people will eventually merge with us, and, you know, I'm all cool with multiculturalism until my kid comes home and says, I want to be like those people. And then all of a sudden, hold on a minute. You know, maybe I'm not so cool with those people being here if they're gonna change our culture. You get what I'm saying, right? And cultures all across the world have that issue. You know, I'm okay with these other people until my kids start dating them. Then we draw the line. You see, and that's a common theme that we find throughout the world. So you have to open that up. One interesting part, to go to a completely separate topic on the do we look inward or do we look outward? And I mean, this is universes away. Is during the 20th century. During World War I, Britain engaged the outside world and traded with the outside world. Germany looked inward. You know, we're going to struggle and work hard and fight through this war and win, right? Take care of our own problems. And which nation won the war? Britain. Because Britain had that big navy that engaged the world and brought in goods and brought in supplies and interacted and understood, you know, we have to be a part of this larger. And when it came down to the clash of civilizations, the open civilization won, the closed civilization didn't. China built a wall around itself, literally and figuratively, refusing to have anything to do with people that weren't Chinese. And the rest of the world developed and China didn't. Remarkable society, but it didn't develop. So opening up yourself to the outside world in the big picture is always going to be better for a society than walling it off. That's, you know, and so this story with the Hebrews is kind of a, you know, it's a first version of cultures that have to deal with this. Yeah.
You said that China didn't develop because it blocked itself in.
Well, China didn't advance technologically and in other ways. You see, China remained in the Middle Ages up until the 19th century because the Chinese, in the 15th century, and again, we are getting way off topic. In the 15th century, the Chinese built huge fleets of ships that explored the entire Indian Ocean all the way to Africa. India, the Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, they went everywhere, okay? And this is before the Portuguese and the Spanish. This is before Christopher Columbus, decades before. And they came back, and the Chinese emperor said, forget it, burn the ships, burn the records, I don't want to have anything to do with those people, right? All of those outside cultures are weird and strange, and they will screw up China, so we are walling this country off, and we want nothing to do with them. And which part of the world ended up accelerating, it was Europe when it embraced the world, right? And East Asia that closed the world off, they didn't do so well. And now China is catching up, of course, because China has started to do what?
Oh, no. Yeah.
China's embracing the world, right? You know, China is now branching out and engaging with the world rather than walling it off.
That's what I was just wondering, because I thought China is one of the most successful countries now.
It's growing. But how is China growing? It's growing by trade. It's growing by commerce. It's growing by communication and interaction, right? So there we go. And so now we're understanding why studying what happened with the Hebrews is, you know, kind of a first version of this logic. Well, they go to Egypt, and of course the Egyptians do not like them. Again, these people are poor and different and weird, and you know they're going to take our stuff and they're going to change who we are, and we don't like them. You know, we're Egyptians and we're doing just fine, so all you other people stay away. Well, what did the Egyptians do to them? They enslaved them. That's exactly right. They enslaved them. This was a way of social control. This was a way to prevent the Egyptian culture from merging with the Hebrew culture. You know, I want my kids and grandkids to be just like me, and that means you can't have anything to do with those Hebrews. And over a generation or two, the Hebrews became a permanent slave class for the Egyptians. You know, at first we don't like these people because they're so weird and different and poor. Now we like the fact that we're making them do all the work, right? All the stuff we don't want to do, we're going to make those Hebrews do. And they are enslaved. And the story now starts getting interesting because you have the rich, powerful Egyptian people and the Hebrew slaves that are the underclass. And along comes someone who will lead them out of slavery. And who's this guy? Moses. Along comes Moses. The tradition teaches that Moses was a Hebrew baby. You know, his mom was a poor Hebrew, and she could not take care of him, which is obviously a very common thing. You know, women get pregnant. We all know how babies are made. There's a great way to avoid it if you're not ready. Don't make one. But anyway, Moses' mom abandoned him in one of the tributaries of the Nile. Somebody have their hands up?
Weren't they going around killing all the firstborns?
Not yet. She abandoned him in a basket on one of the tributaries of the Nile. This is an issue. You know, poor women around the world that do not know what to do with children that they have, that they know they cannot take care of, often abandon them. Some societies throughout the ancient world, even up to the present, even have mechanisms in place to where children can be given up in a manner that's more secure. In Europe, for example, they would have what were called foundling wheels, and it would be like a little dumbwaiter thing, and you could put a baby in and spin it around, and they could take the baby, and they wouldn't even know who you were. And these were common throughout Europe for a very long time, all the way up to the early 20th century. It's a thing, you know. It would be nice if every single child in this world was, you know, planned and all of that, but that's just not how it works. Anyway, moving forward. Moses hit the jackpot. Moses hit the jackpot. Little baby Moses ended up getting found by the daughter of the Pharaoh. She found him in this basket, and she is the Pharaoh's daughter. So he is now in the royal family, and he is raised as a prince. He is raised as a prince. Cha-ching, right? Hey, I can handle that. And Moses doesn't know that the woman that he considers his mother is not actually his mother. You know, not his biological mother. So, he goes through some other adventures. He was not a nice person. There's one instance where he murdered somebody. But, as a young man, God appears before Moses. Yahweh, the God of Abraham, appears before Moses in the form of a burning bush and tells Moses the truth. You know, you are not a prince in the royal family. You are actually a Hebrew. But the real trick is, I got a plan for you. The life you think you're going to live is not the life you're going to have. Your life is about to take a 180 in every direction. It is going to be difficult. It is going to be hard. And you, Moses, are going to free your people from slavery. You will lead them out of here, and they will no longer be slaves. So Moses then leaves the royal family and emerges as the leader of the Hebrews. He emerges as the leader of the Hebrews. So, we presume that Moses would know the Pharaoh. The Old Testament simply says Ramses. Now, there were many Ramseses. Ramses was almost kind of a default term for the Pharaoh during different times. So, again, if this were to have happened, we would not, who knows which Pharaoh it might have been. And like I said, we don't know if this story is even true. But Moses goes to the Pharaoh, let my people go, right? What does the Pharaoh tell Moses? Nope, forget it, man. Now, there's more than one reason for this. First and foremost, I kind of like having all these slaves around doing all the work. That's part of the deal. But there's more to it than that. Okay, the Pharaoh was rich. The Pharaoh was powerful. Nobody really likes the Hebrews anyway. Many people would think, yeah, we'd actually be better off if those people were gone. There's another reason why the Pharaoh is not going to let Moses come up and tell him, you were going to let my people go. Why might the Pharaoh say, no, not going to happen?
Undermines his authority. The economy.
Well, again, we can handle, yes, there's an economic blow, but we also get to get rid of those nasty Hebrews. So there's a benefit here. Well, who's the Pharaoh? What's his role in the world of Egypt?
He's God.
He's God. If you are the Pharaoh, you going to let some poor Hebrew boss you around?
Nope.
Absolutely not. There is no way that I am ever going to let anybody tell me what to do, least of all one of these poor Hebrews. So the minute a Hebrew shows up and says, this is what you're going to do, we can stop the conversation right now. I don't care what it is, I ain't going to do it. Right? When you are the boss man, you do not take orders from the lesser people. And the Pharaoh of all people has to preserve that identity. He can never lose. He can never be bested. He can never be told what he's going to do. He is the only boss. And so this challenge is now a challenge of wills. And so the Pharaoh says no to Moses. It's not the end of the story, of course, because now Moses begins using the power of God to do horrible things to the Egyptian people. You're going to let my people go, or you're going to regret it, man. And now it's the Egyptian gods versus the God of the Hebrews, the God of Abraham. And over the course of several weeks, all kinds of horrible things happen to the Hebrews. Boils come down, and it's a terrible, plague of boils on their skin. Flies show up and bite everybody. Locusts show up and eat all the crops. At one point, Moses turns the Nile to blood. And every drop of water in Egypt is now blood, so nobody can drink. And each time, the Pharaoh only digs his heels in even more. Now the Pharaoh can't lose, can he? I can't be beaten by this poor Hebrew slave. I have to prove that I'm more powerful. And so the scripture teaches that the Pharaoh's heart was hardened every time Moses did one of these terrible things. Well, Moses goes to the Pharaoh and says, man, you better let my people go, or I'm going to do something horrible. Me and my God are going to, man, you don't want to know what's going to happen next. I'm not playing games anymore. And of course, Pharaoh tells Moses where he can go with himself. And so then we have Passover. And of course, what was Passover?
The smiting of the firstborn.
The killing of the firstborn. God sends the angel of death over the Egyptian people, and the firstborn of every Egyptian household dies. And the Hebrews were passed over. They did not suffer. And the scripture teaches they put lamb's blood on the door, and that told angel of death to stay away from them. Not very good for the lamb, by the way.
Wasn't the lamb representative of Christ?
The sacrifice, yeah. Well, you have to sacrifice in the Hebrew culture in order to be forgiven for your sins. But anyway, so after that, Pharaoh is beaten. After that, there's no fighting back anymore. So Pharaoh says, all right, Moses, you can go. Pack your stuff up and leave. Get out. Never come back. You're going to leave, and I never want to see you or your people again. Now, Pharaoh's not really letting the people go because the Pharaoh has clearly been beaten. The Pharaoh has been proven to not be a god. The Pharaoh is just a chump. The Pharaoh is somebody who we do not need to respect. As a matter of fact, because of the Pharaoh, our children are dead. Egyptians rewrite their history. Egyptians always change what happened before to suit the current Pharaoh. The Egyptians are not interested in history as it was. They're interested in history as they want the people to see it. And so we got to get rid of these people. We got to make them go away. So once the Hebrews were way out in the desert, Pharaoh says, all right, it's time to slaughter them. I'm rounding up my army, and I'm going to make sure that there is not a Hebrew left alive. They're done for. So he charges his army after these poor Hebrews. They are fleeing now from the Pharaoh's powerful army. They're not very happy with Moses, are they? Hey, Mo, we were doing all right before. Now the Pharaoh's going to kill all of us. But Moses is saying, you got to keep the faith. This is, God's plan. If you look at a map of Egypt, there's a better map here. Here is Egypt, of course, and here is the Red Sea.
Oh, that's where it is.
It's right here. And it flows into the Indian Ocean. And the Hebrews are coming this way. And of course, Pharaoh's army is coming after them. And there's only so far that they can flee because sooner or later they're going to hit the Red Sea, aren't they? And then they have nowhere to go. And Pharaoh's army is coming at them, and they're backed up against the water. And we're goners now. But oh, no, we're not. Because, of course, God is going to save them, right? And as Pharaoh's army is approaching, God holds them off for a few minutes. What does Moses do? Moses raises his staff, and the Red Sea parts. And the Hebrew people are able to go into where the water was and cross the Red Sea to safety. Now, of course, Pharaoh's army sees this, and they're going to go after him. And so once the Hebrews are on the other side, Pharaoh's army charges in to go after him. But once Pharaoh's army is in there, the waves come crashing back, and the army is destroyed. So the Hebrews win. But we're not done. Now things get rough. Now things get hard. If you look at the geography of where we are, again, here's Egypt. There's Egypt. And here is where the Hebrews are now. They are in the Sinai, which is a pointed, pizza slice-shaped desert. There's some mountains to the south, but it is very dry. It is very hot. People do not live there, even today, simply because there's no real way for them to. It is part of the Egyptian desert. And now the Hebrews are there, and they're going to have to find their way back to their ancestral homeland. And the tradition teaches that for 40 years, the Hebrews wandered in the Sinai. Should have brought a map, I suppose. Well, men won't ask for directions, that's the problem. Should have just said, hey, how do we get there? During this time, Moses goes to the top of one of these mountains, and it is called Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. We don't know which mountain it would have been. There's several of them there. And has another conversation with God. Moses has another conversation with God. And God gives Moses two things. God gives Moses two things. The first thing God gives Moses is the law. And the law is the 10 Commandments. 10 rules that you got to live by. Now, the good news is Moses talked him from 15 down to 10. The bad news is that adultery was still in there. That's the truth. And I guess I can't make jokes. I'm sorry. If y'all don't laugh at them, you're not going to get them.
Yeah, I get it.
The 10 Commandments is the list that you have to live by. And there's plenty of thou shalt nots in there. The second thing that God gave Moses is the covenant, which is an agreement, a contract, a deal with Moses and the Hebrews. Give me just a second, folks. We are going to make a deal. If you follow my law, if you do what you are told, if you are good Hebrews and obey me, you will be my chosen people. You are God's chosen people, the Hebrews, if you follow the law, if you are obedient to God. Now, there's more to the story after that. Moses gets angry and breaks the tablets because the Hebrews had strayed, and there's more to it. But eventually the Hebrews do make it back to their ancestral homeland. Eventually they make it back. Moses doesn't. He doesn't get to go. His job was to lead them out. They are led into their homeland by others. So there's more to the story of Moses in that sense. Part of the tradition, part of the understanding here is that you don't know what direction your life's going to take, do you? You're living large, you're doing fine, everything is the way you think it ought to be, and then on a dime, everything changes. On a dime, everything changes. And so that's part of what you're supposed to understand from this story. Don't assume that the life you're going to live is actually going to be the life you're going to live. The day could come tomorrow where your life is completely upended, and there you go. And for the most part, these changes in life are going to involve you taking on a significant degree of responsibility. You are now an adult. You have to understand that you're not living your life just for you. You're living your life so that you can contribute to the well-being of others, so that you can be an important part of the community, so you can take on leadership roles and important roles of responsibility. Moses was doing great as a prince. And by the way, a prince that didn't ever have to worry about being Pharaoh, right? My mom was a princess. I'll probably never be Pharaoh. I can just be rich and privileged and have a good time. And boy, it's going to be great to be Moses. And the exact opposite ended up happening. He's going to be poor. He's going to work hard. He's going to have to take on leadership and responsibility. And the very people that he's leading are going to hate him most of the time. I mean, it's exactly the opposite of what he wanted. And that's the way life is. That's the deal, folks. Welcome to Earth. Welcome to being human. You don't get to only think about yourself. You have to understand that you have a larger responsibility. And so part of the lesson here, regardless of whether or not this happened, is this is part of what you're supposed to know. You're living your life great, and then suddenly your wife says, hey, I'm pregnant. Guess what happens when kids come along, folks? Your life is over if you are going to be a responsible adult. If you're going to be somebody who lives the way you're supposed to live, the minute you become a parent is the minute what makes you happy is secondary to what somebody else needs. Being a parent isn't hard. It's not complicated. It's just a simple set of rules. Accept that your life is over and problem solved. Be a great mom and dad. You have bills to pay, and other people depend on that. Other people depend on you for a lot of things. You have parents that you have to take care of. You have friends that are going to need your help. You have responsibility. So they make it back. Now they have to form a government. Now they have to start leading themselves again. They've been slaves. They've had all their rules put out for them. But now they've got to be their own people. Now they've got to be their own people. And there are Philistines and there are Canaanites and they are still there. And now these people are showing up and nobody likes them and nobody wants them there, just like when they arrived in Egypt. And so they're going to have to create a kingdom. And they're going to have to carve out a space of land. And they're going to have leaders. And they're going to have laws. And they're going to have rules. The man who led the people into Israel was Joshua. Again, Moses never made it. Boy, that's an interesting life lesson from Moses, isn't it? You do all this work and you don't get the benefit. You plant the tree, but you don't get to eat the fruit. All this work is for the well-being of somebody else down the road, not you. And that's the rule. Moses, that's it. That's it.
What happened now? I don't know.
Oh, Moses ended up dying in the Sinai, and Joshua leads him into Israel. So Moses' job was to lead him out of Egypt. Somebody else's job was to take that next step. So all of that work and effort and difficulty, Moses never actually got to make it to the promised land. He never saw the benefit. Think about that lesson, right? Think about that lesson. Wouldn't it be great if all of your parents put money every single month into a college savings account so that when you go off to college, you can have everything paid for? That's kind of the same logic, right? I'm going to give something over and over again, and then all that money saved up doesn't go to me. It goes to somebody else, doesn't it? Now, granted that somebody else is their kids, but that's kind of the logic. You are supposed to think about who gets this. You don't necessarily get the reward, you do the work. And that's just, if we all accept that, we'll have a better society, right? Because we also reap the rewards of that. We got to have a king. We got to have an army. We got to have land. We have to have security. Another prophet is going to come along, and his name is Samuel. And his name is Samuel. Samuel does not get to be the king, but he gets to choose the king. Samuel will pick the king of the Hebrews, who will bring security and stability and prosperity. And Samuel picks a powerful Hebrew, a man by the name of Saul. A man by the name of Saul. And Saul is a strong, powerful man. Seems like a good choice. Turns out, very bad choice. Saul can't defeat the enemies. The Philistines, the Canaanites, they beat him. So now we got to pick king number 2. So Samuel goes back to the drawing board, and the next king that he picks is the correct choice. And who can tell me who that is? David. He picks David.
David and Goliath.
That same guy.
Oh, wow.
Now, who's David? Well, again, more metaphors, more stories about how you're supposed to look at your life. They're all poor. The Hebrews are not wealthy people. They are not, successful, at least not yet. And so, again, they're shepherds and they're herdsmen and they're, trying to figure their way out. And so the story teaches that, of course, David was a poor little shepherd boy. Now, the thing about raising sheep and goats, of course, is that wolves want to eat those animals. The wolves show up and they eat your livestock because they're wolves. And so the purpose of being, one of these shepherd boys is to guard the flock all the time to make sure that the wolves don't show up. And when the wolves start, sneaking up looking for a sheep Big Mac, your job is to run the wolves off. And one way that they do it is with slings. You take a little leather pouch and you put a rock in it, sling it around your head, let the rock go and rein the wolf, and he'll learn his lesson and stay away. And they start doing this at a very young age, and that's a very common occupation for these young Hebrew boys. Well, there is a big, ugly, mean Philistine by the name of Goliath. And Goliath is harassing the people and being a bully. and nobody can defeat him. So what does David do? Bring it on, Goliath. I'm going to defeat you. Now, of course, David is this little boy, and Goliath is the big, powerful warrior. So they show up, and of course, what does David do? He brings his sling. Pow! Brains Goliath right between the eyes, kills Goliath. David wins. There's a moral of the story, right? Don't bring a knife to a gunfight, right? Maybe it's important to be smarter and better prepared than bigger and stronger. I'll take small and smart any day over big and stupid, right? David won because he outthought the situation. I'm not bigger than that guy, so I'm going to have to beat him another way. And Goliath was overconfident, right? Goliath was overconfident. Goliath thought, I can't be beat. I'm so tough and such a bad dude. Nobody will ever mess with me. But he never actually thought that, yeah, he's got a weakness. You know, if you act like that, someone's going to come along and knock you out. The heavyweight champion of the world, the baddest dude on the planet, was a man you've heard of named Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson was destroying his opponents in the ring. These were not even fights worth watching in the late 80s. I mean, these were fights that were ending within the first few seconds of every round because Mike Tyson was an absolute monster in the ring. And in, I want to say 1990 or 1991, he agreed to fight a nobody by the name of James Buster Douglas, who hadn't really won that many fights and hadn't really, you know, made much of a name for himself, but he was next in line to just be pummeled by Mike Tyson. And you know what Tyson decided to do? Not take it seriously. He didn't really train. He didn't really pay much attention. This guy's a loser. What happened in that fight? Buster Douglas beat him, right? Because James Buster Douglas studied all of Mike Tyson's earlier fights. He paid very close attention to the techniques. He figured Tyson will not take me seriously. And he developed a punching style that could avoid getting hit and then just pop Mike Tyson left and right. And one problem with Mike Tyson is he had no endurance. Mike Tyson could only win if he won in the first 2 or 3 rounds. You get him to the 3rd or 4th round and suddenly he starts getting tired. And so Buster Douglas just dragged it out. He avoided getting hit hard. He hit small, you know, and if you go back on YouTube and watch the fight, David beat Goliath. It's that simple, right? Don't be arrogant thinking you're big and tough and bad and everybody's just going to get, you know, no. Nope. When you're smarter, you win by outthinking your opponent. Another story. Well, David becomes king. David becomes king. And David is a powerful king. David is a man who raises armies that defeat the Philistines and the Canaanites, carves out the land for the Hebrew people. David is not a nice person. David is straight up gangster. He does horrible things to his enemies. I mean, when you read the stories of David, you're like, oh, I can't believe they like this guy. I mean, how could you possibly consider this guy a hero? He was also a philanderer, cheated on his wife, you know.
What did he do? I've never heard anything like that.
Look it up. We got to move on, but boy, he put the hurt on Saul and his sons, crucified him. Anyway, now what's David's role? David's role is not to be a nice person. David's role is to secure the kingdom. David's role is to make the Hebrews safe. We need somebody who can do this. David makes the capital Jerusalem. David makes the capital Jerusalem. And Jerusalem will now become the largest, most significant city in what we will call the Holy Land. Now, when the 10 Commandment stones were broken by Moses, Moses got mad and slammed them and broke them. The Hebrews put them in a very special box called the Ark of the Covenant. They put them in a very special box, the Ark. And these were the holiest relics to the Hebrew people. And the ark would be located in Jerusalem. Now, David ends up, of course, going on, and David's son was Solomon. David's son was Solomon. If David was the powerful military man, he's the general, he's the soldier, Solomon is a businessman. See, they're safe now. They're secure now. They don't need somebody to go out and whip up on the enemies. Now they can build their culture. Now they can be prosperous. Now they can be secure. And so David's the warrior, Solomon's the businessman. And Solomon was rich. Solomon was the wealthiest man in the world. And the Hebrew people prospered under King Solomon. At a high point in Jerusalem, he built a beautiful temple. And in that temple, he put the Ark of the Covenant, where the pieces are of the Ten Commandments. Or the pieces are of the Ten Commandments. Well, all might seem to be well, but we've got another problem that has to do with human nature. Right up, all the way up to this point, being a Hebrew has been a struggle, right? Being a Hebrew has been hard. Every generation has these challenges and these difficulties. We've got these mountains we've got to climb. Well, it's another metaphor for human behavior. Now that Solomon is king, everything's great. We're good. We're prosperous. We've got money. We've got security. And the next generations did not keep it going. The next generations did not show the strength and the maturity and the effort that had been put into building the kingdom. And so the kingdom gets weaker. The kingdom becomes decadent. The kingdom starts taking advantage of its prosperity rather than understanding that it's something you have to keep up. And eventually it starts infighting. And the kingdom breaks in two. We end up with two kingdoms instead of one. One is the kingdom of Israel, and the other is the kingdom of Judah. And Israel was to the north, and Judah was to the south. And Jerusalem was in Judah, but that doesn't really matter. So now the two people are divided politically. And Judah is where the term Jew comes from, in case you're wondering. Judah is where the term Jew comes from. And as these younger generations don't pay attention to what's going on around them and don't keep up the prosperity, don't put the work and the effort into building their society, eventually they become vulnerable. Now think about this for a minute. This is kind of another part of how humans work, right? You've got this challenge and you work real hard. Maybe you don't have your college paid for, and you don't have all of this that you're going to inherit, and you're going to have to earn it. You can do well in life, but it's going to take work for you. So you go out and you work hard, and you make good grades, and you get a good job, and all of a sudden you're living well, and you're able to give your children what you didn't have. What often happens with the children? They don't appreciate it, right? They don't work hard. They don't see life as a struggle. Dad made A's in school. Mom made A's in school. I think I can get away with B's, right? Mom and dad were working hard when they were, the minute they were old enough to get jobs, they did it. And the minute, they took advantage of every opportunity. I think I'd rather play video games on the weekend, right? I'm going to enjoy being part of a well-off family. And then, of course, the grandkids are even worse, aren't they? Right? The grandkids are total bums. But it was, Grandma and Grandpa worked their tails off to make this family something special. And now the future generations are taking advantage of it and not putting the effort into keeping it going. Right? We work real hard to build up what we have, but the people who never had to go through that struggle have to appreciate the fact that it's not just automatically theirs. People take their prosperity for granted. People take what is given to them as an entitlement rather than something that must be earned. And that is a tremendous challenge for people. It's a tremendous challenge for families, and it's a tremendous challenge for societies. You know, a society builds itself up, and then all of a sudden, the next generations don't really seem to care, and they let it all fall apart. You know, we understand that story. We've seen that pattern in all sorts of different ways. And so you got to understand that that's going to happen. If you work hard to get what you have to put extra effort into making sure that the future generations put just as much effort into it, even though they don't have to struggle. And nothing is worse than you seeing these well-off families that deliberately indulge their children, right? Give them everything they want and never expect them to work, never make them, experience consequences. Y'all hate those kids, don't you? Y'all saw them in high school, they never had to do anything and they were given everything, right? A lot of them turn out to be bums, don't they? A lot of them turn out to not do so well because they don't appreciate the struggle. And that's kind of the story here. David and Solomon and Moses and all these other leaders built that kingdom up. Now, it's going to be fine. Why do I care? I'm going to be great. All this good stuff is just automatically here, right? It's not something we have to work for. In 722, the Assyrian Empire conquered the Hebrews. And you can even see you can't see. Here is Judah right here on this map, actually. It's this little vassal state right here. But in 722, the Assyrians conquered them. So they are no longer independent. Jerusalem was looted and destroyed. The Ark of the Covenant was probably destroyed or looted, or something happened to it at that point. In 586, let me find a white space here. In 586, they were conquered again. And this time by the Chaldean Empire, the fellow by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember him? Nebuchadnezzar and his empire conquered him again in 586. And this time they are enslaved again. Now this is now centuries after the Egyptians, hundreds of years after the Egyptians. But they are now enslaved. Many of them are taken away. And for 50 years or so, they were slaves to Nebuchadnezzar's empire. And this is an event called the Babylonian captivity. This is an event called the Babylonian captivity. So they went from having everything to losing it all and being enslaved again. And you see, before we can blame the Egyptians, right? Those big bad Egyptians did it to them. Now who do we blame? They got to blame themselves, right? They got to blame themselves. They had it all. They decided that they were going to take it for granted. They decided they weren't going to put in the work that their ancestors had, so you lose it. Too bad, so sad, man. It is during this time that probably, this is, presumed, that probably they began writing their scripture down. Up to this point, a lot of what we're talking about was oral tradition. The story of Moses and Pharaoh and Jacob and all of this. But because they are now spread far and wide and they are enslaved, they are going to start writing it. They're going to start recording it to make sure that their ancestors understand what went wrong. What we had, what we built, what we screwed up, and of course, what the religion and tradition is and the stories. After 50 years, they are freed. And I won't get into the story of that, but a slave girl to Nebuchadnezzar actually soldiered up and demanded that he free them. And there's even a story behind that. This little 16-year-old slave girl stood up to the powerful Nebuchadnezzar, and it ended up working out for her. Strength is not how big and powerful you are physically. Strength is between your ears. Some of the strongest people in the world are the people you would look at and say, yeah, they're not very strong. Right? Look at Gandhi, right? This shriveled up little Indian dude. Most powerful man ever to come out of India. Being strong and powerful is not just about being Hulk Hogan. There's a lot of different ways in which strength and power are expressed. And you don't know how strong you are until you're put into positions where you have to express it. You never know, again, when you have to become a strong person. And that's when you really learn who you are. And the story of the freedom from the Babylonian captivity is the story of a seemingly weak teenage girl confronting a very powerful man and winning. Not unlike Moses, of course. Boy, life is getting rough for us, though, right? Freed from 50 years of captivity, but we lost our kingdom, we lost our prosperity. I was under the impression that we are God's chosen people. I was under the impression that, God made this covenant with us, and things are not supposed to be this terrible. We weren't supposed to be conquered by all these outsiders. We weren't supposed to be enslaved now. We were given the covenant with God. Well, a lot of the Hebrews started walking away from the faith. They started deciding, this isn't for me. Obviously, God is not on our side. Obviously, this is all a sham. Because if we were God's chosen people, we would not have been conquered and enslaved. And 3 prophets are going to come along. Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. And again, it's a whiteboard, and I hate writing on whiteboards, so forgive me. Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel. And they are going to tell the Hebrew people, keep the faith. You're not abandoned by God. We're still Hebrews, and we're still God's chosen people. We are not beaten at all. This idea that we've been defeated, this idea that God is no longer with us, that's nonsense. Of course, God has not abandoned us, and we are still who we are. Certainly not the first time we've had challenges. You see, what's happened is we have abandoned God. We have broken the covenant. God gave us the 10 Commandments. God gave us the rules. We weren't living by them. We were not following the rules.
I was just wondering, did these 3 guys know each other, work together?
I would assume so, but no, again, I'm simplifying a more complex story. All right, so just keep that in mind, right? I'm not giving you the full Sunday school here. And like I said, if you want that, go to church. But the problem is we abandoned God. God didn't abandon us. We abandoned God. And so the suffering that we are experiencing is a punishment for doing so. Just like a parent punishing a child, God is punishing us for our own sinful behavior. We took the covenant for granted. We took what we were given for granted. We were told not to lie, and we lied. We were told not to steal, and we stole. We were told to honor our fathers and mothers, and we did not honor them because they gave us everything and we squandered it, etc., etc. And we Hebrew people will continue to be punished by God. We will continue to suffer until God decides to ease that suffering, until God decides to lift it. And that day will happen when God sends a Savior, a Messiah. That's probably not the right spelling. A Savior will come. A Messiah will come to save us and redeem us, to forgive us of our sins. And when that day comes, a new period called Zion will emerge. A new era of prosperity and strength, just like the kingdom of Solomon and David. The kingdom of Zion will emerge, and we will now no longer have to suffer. But until the Messiah shows up, until the Savior shows up, the Hebrew people are going to suffer. The Hebrew people are going to have it rough. The Hebrew people are going to endure hardship. Now, of course, if you're Jewish today, you're waiting for the Messiah, right? You know, today's Jews are looking around and saying, one of these days the Messiah is going to show up, and the sooner the better, because, you know, goodness knows we've had it tough. I mean, that's your general attitude by Jews. Now, of course, if you're Christian, what do you believe? A little louder? The Messiah has already come. If you're a Christian, you believe that the Messiah showed up and his name was Jesus. The Christians believe that the Messiah emerged, Jesus was the Messiah, and his sacrifice opened up the gates to this new world, right? And that if you embrace this, you are a Christian, and there you go. And so Jews have different opinions of Jesus. You know, maybe he was a good guy, maybe he was a bad guy, maybe he was this or that. But they universally agree Jesus was not the Messiah. You know, he was a rabbi, he was a carpenter, he was this or that. One role that he does not have is that role of Messiah. Christians believe that he was. And so the Christians have a second book called the New Testament, which is an addition and life after and during Christ's life. So what are Hebrew beliefs? You know, what's going on if you're a Hebrew? Well, you can see there's all sorts of life lessons that you see throughout the history and tradition. And even though we know that a lot of this didn't necessarily happen, a lot of it actually did. You know, the city of Jerusalem is there. There are artifacts from all the different people that have lived there, including Hebrews. It's a complicated place because it's a very old city. But the point is, you're supposed to take life lessons from all of these events. The life that you're supposed to live might end up not being the life you want. Your life can change on a dime. You are supposed to be responsible. You are supposed to give to your community. You are not supposed to squander what you are given. You're supposed to understand that life is a struggle. That's what life is. Life is not easy. Life is hard. If you want to succeed, you got to work for it. Everything good in your life was done because somebody worked for it. And that means you have to put that in there as well. And when you decide you're not going to do it, well, things fall apart. It is important to understand your tradition. It is important to understand your history. Jews believe that the individual is sovereign. The individual has dignity. You as a person actually matter. You as a person actually matter, and you're important. And you're supposed to do something important. You're supposed to make a contribution because there you go. Hebrew tradition teaches that laws should be based on the covenant. There's not a separation of church and state. There's not a separation of church and state. And on that note, we can leave a little early if you want. Or not. What do y'all want to do? Of course y'all want to leave. I'm not kidding. Let's go ahead and cut it off today because I want to do the Greeks on Tuesday, and then we're going to have our exam on Thursday. Now, here's the deal. You want me to give you some essay topics? You want to talk about the test a little bit? Okay. Like I said, we will have our first exam a week from today. Okay. There will be a study guide up if it's not up already. I promise you I'll have one up shortly after this class. It's just a big long list of terms, and if you know those terms, you're in good shape. There might be a term or two that I didn't necessarily hit in class because, as you can see, I'm not always going to hit everything, but a handful of terms that might not be on there, you're welcome to contact me about, or use the internet or whatever. I'm totally cool with however you find them out. But most of those terms on there you will have in your notes. And like I said last time, the first part of the exam is just going to be fill in the blanks. Okay, I'll give you a sentence, and then you'll put the term on there that matches. There will also be an essay. You will get to choose the essay that you write. I'll put an option on there. Okay, one essay is going to be Neolithic and Paleolithic and early proto-humans. Okay, not proto-humans, but prehistory. Okay, and the differences between the various eras of prehistory. A second essay topic will be Egypt, right? What is the history of Egypt? The Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom. Names, dates, events, etc. A third essay topic I'd like you to study is what we talked about today, the Hebrews. What is their history? What is their traditions? How did the Hebrews go from being Abraham to being people with their own kingdom in the Middle East? Now, I will put 2 of those on there. Okay, so I'm not going to put all 3, but I'll put 2 of those on there, and you can pick the one you want to answer. Okay, and so what you'll do is you'll just write an essay, 1 front page, and there we have it. Sound good? All right, y'all take care. I will see everybody on Tuesday.